Okay, continuing on with the Toothy Critters portion of the ASMFC meeting, we'll roll right into the Bluefish Management Board. I want to welcome everyone. My name is Chris Bat-Savage. I'm the administrative proxy for North Carolina. I'll be serving as chair for the Bluefish Board meeting. Start by the approval of the agenda. Does anyone have any modifications to the agenda? Okay, one that I would like to add, if there's no objection, is after we get through our action items, is to just get a sense from the board members of when they think they'll be able to implement the new the 2020 recreational measures for bluefish in their states. If there's no objection to that, we'll just do that at the very end. Okay, seeing none. Approval of the minutes from April 2018. Is there any changes or edits to those minutes? Okay, seeing none, then those are approved. Next is public comment. Is there any members of the public who would like to speak on any topics that are not on the agenda for today? Seeing none. We'll move on to the first action item, which is consider approval of conservation equivalency proposals. And I'll hand that over to Dustin Colson-Leaning. Dustin?
Hi, everyone. As Chris just said, my name is Dustin. I am the Fishery Management Plan Coordinator for Bluefish, and today I have a brief presentation on recreational bluefish proposals for the 2020 fishing season. I'll begin with some background information and then discuss technical committee review of bluefish proposals, followed by a summary of comments from the Law Enforcement Committee. And at the end, we'll have time for questions before expedited board discussion and action. In December, the board approved and the council recommended a coast-wide 3-fish bag limit for private and shore-based anglers and a 5-fish bag limit for the for-hire fishermen for the 2020 recreational bluefish season. These measures would be applied in both state and federal waters. As a reminder, the Commission's Conservation Equivalency, or CE, policy allows states to submit alternative measures for state waters that achieve the same reduction in recreational landings that would have been achieved under the coastwide regulations. Following the December meeting, the Bluefish Technical Committee, or TC, met via conference call on December 16th to set conservation equivalency criteria for state proposals. The following criteria were specified in the memo to the board. I'll run through them quickly, but all reductions must be calculated in pounds of fish as opposed to numbers of fish. Conservation equivalency analysis should use recreational data from 2016 to 2018. If the percent standard error, or PSE values, exceeded 50, then the data should be pooled across the 3-year time frame. Seasonal closures need to be for an entire wave as well. And the analysis should assume that non-compliant harvest will continue at the same level in 2020. Reductions in landings for multiple measures should be accounted for using the interaction equation that you see up on the slide. Lastly, the memo provided state-by-state projected reductions under the coastwide regulations. States were required to demonstrate that proposed measures achieved equal or greater percent reductions than those presented in this table. Following the first TC meeting, Rhode Island, Connecticut, New Jersey, and Georgia submitted proposals for conservationally equivalent measures. However, last week, Connecticut and Rhode Island decided to withdraw their regional bluefish CE proposal from board consideration, so I have removed discussion of this proposal from my presentation. The TC met a second time via conference call on January 23rd to review state proposals. The TC also recommended approval of the methodologies used to develop both Georgia and New Jersey's proposals. Before discussing each state's proposal and the TC recommendation, I will share some general comments from the TC on the conservation equivalency process as a whole. The TC maintains that there is a high level of uncertainty in the percent reductions calculated due to the effect of changes in angler behavior, the size and structure and distribution of the population as well. These changes are difficult to account for and cannot be accurately quantified. Additionally, there is greater certainty in the percent reductions calculated for simple management measures, such as changes in bag limits or minimum size, and relatively more difficult for complex measures such as slot limits and sector-specific regulations. Furthermore, through the course of evaluating proposals, the TC discovered that when analyses were conducted on disaggregated MRIP modes, for example, splitting the private angler mode and the shore mode into separate modes, the expected reduction in harvest from the coastwide measures was less than anticipated from analyses in which the modes were left combined, as was the case in the coastwide measures. The discrepancy appears related to differences in the scale of snapper fisheries and the associated effect on average fish weight among modes and states. The table presented here provides the range of anticipated prediction reductions for states resulting from various approaches. The difference is especially dramatic in some states, such as Rhode Island, with prominent snapper fisheries. This is an important consideration for projecting 2020 harvest and for the future when considering separate recreational measures by mode. First, going into Georgia's proposal, its 2020 recreational bluefish fishery proposal is quite simple. The state proposes to keep its 2019 measures in place, which includes a 12-inch minimum size and a 15-fish bag limit, with the exception that it has a 2-month closure during the months of March and April. The analysis indicates that Georgia's harvest would be reduced by 13.10%, which exceeds its reduction requirement according to the table of 8.13%. The TC has approved Georgia's proposal, but did want to highlight that the wave PSE values exceed 50% even after pooling the data across 3 years. PSE is a measure of precision, and MRIP specifies that large PSEs above 50 indicate a very imprecise estimate. It's important for the board just to consider this from a risk analysis perspective. Moving on to the New Jersey proposal. This proposal included 8 options for the TC to consider. The options include adjustments to minimum size, a slot limit option, a bag limit option, and seasonal closures. All options meet or exceed New Jersey's specific required reduction of 27.68%. These are the options here, and they're also listed with their corresponding projected reduction percentage. The TC agreed that proposal's methodology met the conservation equivalency criteria as specified in the guidance memo. However, a few TC members raised concern about options 5 and 8, which maintain high bag limits. Their concern was that while the analysis does demonstrate that these options meet the required reductions in weight, the options may not produce a similar reduction percentage in numbers of fish. As such, the TC suggested that the board take into consideration the stock's overfish status when considering these 2 options from a risk analysis perspective. That being said, the TC still recommends approval of New Jersey's proposal for the 2020 recreational bluefish fishery on technical merit. Now moving into the LEC, or the Law Enforcement Committee, comments. The LEC also met on January 23rd to review CE proposals for both the striped bass and bluefish fisheries. I'll focus on the input gathered that is pertinent to bluefish proposals since you've already received a presentation from Max. The LEC provided a few comments regarding regulation changes in general. First, any change to regulations required increased outreach effort and education, both of which take time to be successful. Second, frequent changes to regulations lowers overall compliance, so consistency and simplicity in regulations is key. The LEC also shared that officers will usually issue more warnings than citations following a regulation change, so there's a phase-in process that should be considered as well. The LEC also provided the following feedback specific to the proposed measures. Differing regulations by mode poses challenges for enforcement. The more divided recreational fishing modes are, the more difficult it is to adequately enforce any restrictions. This is especially true in marinas or at docks where for-hire and private and rental boat anglers commingle. New seasonal closures can increase unintentional noncompliance, so when they are implemented, closures should remain in place for several years. If possible, it is also better to implement one continuous closure rather than 2 or 3 separate closures so that anglers are not caught off guard. The LEC also discussed the importance of consistency when implementing regulations in shared water bodies or neighboring states to help reduce their confusion. Officers will enforce strict possession limits at the location where anglers are stopped, which can lead to unintentional noncompliance if an angler is stopped in one area but was fishing in an adjacent jurisdiction with different regulations. Overall, the LEC indicated that all regulations proposed are enforceable, but emphasized that consistency and simplicity in regulations is key in preventing noncompliance. And with that, I'll open it up to questions.
Thanks for the presentation, Dustin. Before I get to the board, I just had one clarifying question for you in your presentation, and maybe New Jersey could chime on this. I think it said that they had a 9-inch minimum size limit for their recreational fishery in 2019. Is that the case, or is that just for their commercial fishery? Because I know some of the CE proposals they have do not have a minimum size limit of 9 inches. Or maybe if Joe or someone from New Jersey has the answer to that.
Yeah, I guess I'm not sure where you saw that a minimum was in place.
I think it was in Dustin's presentation.
So I'm looking here at the FMP review of the 2018 fishing season, and in that document we have a 9-inch minimum size as the regulation for New Jersey for bluefish. Is that what you're referring to, whether that was the regulation that was in place previously?
I'm just wanting to confirm that that was indeed the case, or is that just for the commercial fishery? Because I just wasn't aware that New Jersey had a minimum size limit for the recreational fishery already in place.
Excuse me.
Me neither, Mr.
I was
Chair.
referring to the wrong column in the table. That's my mistake. You are correct that there is not a minimum size, so please strike that from my presentation on the rec side. Apologies there.
No worries. Okay, I just wanted to make sure that was, I guess everyone was clear on that, especially since it'll kind of play into New Jersey's proposal. So, any questions, Nicola?
Thank you, Mr. Chairman. A couple of questions for Dustin. The 28% reduction that we're trying to achieve for this year is based on the 2018 landings of 13.27 million pounds. I was wondering if we have an update on the 2019 landings and how they're faring in comparison to 2018. And the second part of the question is about the relative contribution of Georgia and New Jersey to the coastwide total harvest.
Yeah, so I can pull up a slide here with Maya's help. If you keep scrolling through till you get to a couple more. Actually go back to, that would be the one, yes. So I have up here that if you look at wave 1 through 5 landings, we have 15.83 million pounds for 2019, and using 2018 as indicative of how much harvest occurs within the first waves to try to predict the total projected harvest, we have a projected total landings of 17.22 million pounds. And can you remind me again of your second question?
The relative contribution of Georgia and New Jersey to the coastwide landings, just to get an idea of how their regulations will play into the the scheme of the coastwide landings.
Yeah, if you could slide 2, 3, maybe 4 slides over, that would be the one, yes. So this is just looking at a 3-year average harvest. We've got about 25% for New Jersey in terms of their contribution to the recreational fishery, and then Georgia is at 0.11.
Jason McNamee.
Thank you, Mr. Chair. Nice job, Dustin. Thanks for the presentation, and nice job with the extra slides, too. So my question, the technical committee kind of raised a couple of items about risk, and they kind of highlighted two of New Jersey's proposal, the one with the slot, and then the one that split the modes. And so, you know, they kind of talked about they talked about increase. My interpretation is there's this notion that those two increase the risk. Is there anything? Did they offer anything in addition to just that kind of notion of increased risk due to the increased complexity of the regs, or was there more to it than that?
I know that the first question that was asked was, is this something that you, if you implement a really wide slot, let's say, for one of the options, and you still maintain a high bag limit, some TC members were concerned that maybe just the time window of when we're projecting MREP harvest from, using 2016 to 2018 as a base reference years, if that just happened to work out in such a way that you would achieve a 27.68 reduction, or whether if you expanded the time window to 10 years, whether the data wouldn't work out, and essentially asking if those years were anomalous. Looking into the data a little bit further, it didn't appear that way, but there were some concerns from the TCU perspective that when you break things down by state, by wave, by mode, looking at, you know, length frequencies, that the PSCs just kind of get higher and higher, and there's some concern that it's just paper math rather than an actuality.
Yeah. Further questions? Justin Davis.
Thank you, Mr. Chairman. So Dustin, I think you just told us that we would be looking at something like a 44% reduction from projected 2019 landings to meet the 2020 RHL. But I think we used 2018, right, as our metric for reduction, and we took about was it about a 30% reduction overall from 2018 landings. 2018 landings look like they would be substantially less than what's projected for 2019. So is it fair to say that it's likely we were too conservative with the reduction that we're planning on taking to meet the 2020 RHL? And as a follow-up, what are the implications if we do exceed the 2020 RHL next year?
Dustin?
I would say that's this discussion came up at the board meeting in October, and the monitoring committee had put forward a projected reduction using 2016 through 2018 as base years. 2018 was a surprisingly low year for the recreational fishery, and so the board at the meeting seemed to indicate that we should use the most recent data to generate this projection. So I think the monitoring committee projected reduction was in the range of the high 30s, if my memory serves me. So now using this updated information about 2019, I think it's fair to say that a 28.56% reduction isn't going to cut it, using 2019 as a reference point. In terms of what are the implications, without getting too much in the weeds on the regulations, I will say that there is a pound-for-pound payback in the federal plan. It's a joint plan, but that's in the event that the stock is overfished, which it currently is, as well as in the event that a sector transfer is not to blame for any ACL overages. In terms of how the payback occurs, it's quite nuanced, so I don't know if I want to dive too deeply in there, but I would be happy to put up the language up on the board if that helps.
Yeah, a question I have on that, and it might be for NOAA Fisheries, is just due to the timing of getting final MRIP estimates, would that pound-for-pound payback for the recreational fishery, if we went over in 2020, would that occur in 2021, or would it be in 2022? Derek, I don't know if you have put you on the spot. I don't know if you have an answer for that.
Actually, I'm chatting with some of our folks up in Garfo now on that. So as soon as we As soon as I get something, I can let you know. I don't know off the top of my head.
All right. Jay, do you have something else?
Yeah, thank you, Mr. Chair. So the question that Justin asked kind of made me wonder, so in summer flounder, we have conservation equivalency. It's how we do that fishery, and there's accountability built into it. In the case of bluefish, that accountability does not exist on it. The accountability is at the way up the flow chart there. So, for instance, if New Jersey or Georgia blew past their, what their goal of what they're trying to do with their CE, it doesn't matter to them specifically. It matters to everyone. Is that correct?
That's my understanding, and I'm seeing Tony nod her head.
Justin?
Thank you, Mr. Chair. Dustin, could you also remind us, so we're currently working on a rebuilding plan, which was triggered because the stock was declared overfished, and there's some date certain by which that rebuilding plan needs to be implemented, I believe. So which fishing year would we likely see implementation of the rebuilding plan?
The announcement from Garfo came in on November of 2019. So it starts a 2-year countdown from that date as to when implementation of the plan would need to be, and then the stock needs to be rebuilt to the target level within 10 years.
Sherry Patterson?
Thank you, Mr. Chair. So NOAA Fisheries has a pound-for-pound payback system, whereas are we working with pounds here, or are we working with numbers of fish? Quotas in pounds? Okay, thank you.
Sorry, Derek, did I see your hand earlier?
Yeah, so yes, it is counted in pounds. And the payback would be in 2022.
Thank you for following up on that. Any other questions from the board? Nicola?
Thank you, Mr. Chairman. I guess it's really a question to the neighboring states. At the Striped Bass Board, there was a lot of discussion about, concerns about compliance and enforcement and equity between neighboring states with different regulations that resulted from CE. And I'm wondering if, any of the neighboring states have any input on whether they have similar concerns with bluefish as were expressed for striped bass.
Any concerns from some of the states regarding his different regulations in shared waters? Jim Gilmore.
Thank you, Mr. Chairman. I don't know if it's a concern, because when I first looked at this, I was like, well, if you got a high-value species like black sea bass or fluke, whatever, or striped bass, then you can start seeing there's definitely competition. Bluefish doesn't seem to rise to that, that level, because there's not, when I saw the numbers going down to a 3-fish bag, I was like, that's great, because anything above that tends to end up in the garbage. So I'm kind of looking at this. I don't have a problem maybe with the other states are doing in terms of competition, whatever, but and I guess we can get to it, is like, I have the same concern I see with the TC. Is like, if you see they want to get a few more fish, like up to 8-fish bag or something like that, yeah, fine. 10 to 15 fish bag limits, someone needs to explain to me why that makes any sense. And again, I always have to tell and admit I'm a bi-state resident, so when I'm in Jersey, it's the same fishery we got in New York. Maybe down south it's differently, but when I go out, I had a blitz last summer, and I see boats taking a lot of fish, and I said, what are you doing with those? And most of them are probably throwing them in the garbage. So I really kind of question, is that really a high bag limit like that make any sense? So if somebody can enlighten me, that'd be great.
Joe Semino?
Thank you, Mr. Chair. I didn't expect to find this in this position. The timing of this was actually a bigger challenge than striped bass. With striped bass, we had 3 public hearings and tried to craft some options. Here, we didn't have time to do anything, but there was huge backlash, and it wasn't just in New Jersey that, that decision that was made to do the 3-5 split was a big decision that the public should have had more input on. So we tasked ourselves in the Marine Fisheries Administration with coming up with some options that met these reductions, most of which, as you see, wipe away the 3-5 mode split. There are a couple that do still have that in there. So we honestly don't know if we would go out to our public and they would hate every one of these options. We were simply trying to do our best to put options forward, which is what we thought was the board decision. And we certainly expected other states to be doing the same thing. So I can't say that we're sitting here fighting for any of these, but the big thing for us was to get some options for our public that wiped away the mode split. Thanks.
Thanks, Joe. Roy Miller.
Thank you, Mr. Chair. Just to follow up on Joe's comments, I presume all of your options would be statewide. Am I correct in that? And Joe's shaking his head yes. So you haven't given any consideration to potential differences in Delaware Bay, that kind of thing, the age-old topic that we dealt with striped bass and summer flounder and so on. Thanks.
John McMurray.
Thank you, Mr. Chairman. Really, my concerns are the same that we just went over and over again with striped bass, mostly consistency amongst states, consistent regulations. But also, we're already taking an extraordinary risk by using 2018 harvest as a proxy for 2020 landings. CEs for bluefish would add to that uncertainty. And also, from New York's perspective, it would give New Jersey an advantage over adjacent states, particularly New York. And I'm talking specifically about the party boat fleet because, frankly, most people in the private angling community are okay with three fish.
Thanks, John. Any further questions or comments? Okay, I think we're getting to the point of taking action on these conservation equivalency proposals put forward. So we can try to do it in one motion or address them individually, whatever the board wants to do on this, as long as it doesn't take 7 hours like striped bass. Nicola Meserve.
Thank you, Mr. Chairman. And I'll have the questions of kind of set the groundwork for this, but I'm concerned that we're setting ourselves up for a difficult course correction in a year or two when we have a rebuilding plan being implemented, and also what are very likely to be pound for pound payback for overage this year. I don't think we're in a position where we want to be adding additional uncertainty to the projections at this time. In 2019, we have the benefit of commercial underage to help with what Dustin showed was going to be an overage of the RHL in 2019. We're not going to be in the same position in 2020. We talked, the TC comments also talked about the uncertainty in angler behavior to the new bag changes, and I think that's especially so in a case with bluefish where we've had a 15 fish limit set since 2001, and I think we'd be in a better position of sticking with more coastwide measures and not depreciating the value of the 5 and 3 bag limits. Particularly where one of the states is responsible for about a quarter of the landings, and it has accountability for all of us. So with that, I would move to prohibit the use of conservation equivalency and recreational bluefish management for 2020, with an exception for states that are accountable for less than 1% of the coastwide recreational harvest.
Okay, we'll go ahead and get that motion up on the board. Okay, move to prohibit the use of conservation equivalency for bluefish management with the exception of states that are accountable for less than 1% of the total coastwide harvest. Motion by Nicola Meserve and second by Cherie Patterson. Any discussion on the motion? Nicola.
Just wanted to add in the word recreational in there somewhere. Conservation equivalency for recreational bluefish management. Thanks.
Okay, yeah, Cherie, I guess you're fine with that addition. Okay. Justin Davis.
Thank you, Mr. Chairman. So question for the maker of the motion, is this just for 2020?
Yes, that was also part of the motion. Thank you. In recreational bluefish management for 2020, meaning that it would be the board's purview to reconsider where we are in 2021 if we want to allow CE then or not. So it would just be for 1 year.
Okay, Cherie, you're okay with that modification? Okay. Further discussion? Jay McNamee.
Thank you, Mr. Chair. So I'm kind of, thinking through this, and I think this is, I always get concerned about consistency in the things that I'm doing management-wise, and I like this motion and support it, and I'm trying to convince myself I'm not being completely inconsistent with what we just did for striped bass. But I think the difference here is there's a higher authority, and with the accountability. The accountability for striped bass, we had that discussion, but in this case, we know there is accountability. There's going to be a pound for pound payback. It's going to affect all of us, not just the states doing the CE. And we know we're kind of behind the curve here to begin with, and so I think I'm going to support this motion.
Thanks, Jay. Roy Miller.
Mr. Chairman, reiterating the point I made earlier, we have concerns about setting ourselves up for differential regulations in Delaware Bay when we can avoid it. And if a couple of the New Jersey proposals were implemented, we would have a fair amount of differential in regulations in Delaware Bay, which is, of course, is a shared border. So I'm inclined to support the motion because if there were a coast-wide exceedance of the target reduction, I believe we would all have to pay back the following year, rather than just the state of New Jersey if they went over. If it was on a state-by-state basis, then I would have no concerns about it. But if they're going to be more liberal in terms of their size limits in Delaware Bay and shared waters, then that concerns me. Thanks.
Thanks. Justin Davis.
Thank you, Mr. Chairman. So I generally support this motion. I have the same concerns that have been voiced around the table about the likely overage of the RHL that we're facing next year and the paybacks and the rebuilding plan that's coming. I would note that New Jersey's proposal number 2, as I look at it, seems like it essentially would be more conservative than the standard coastwide option because you're not allowing for a higher bag limit for the for-hire mode. So it seems like that would actually potentially add to conservation, unless I'm misunderstanding something. And New Jersey's, one of their stated reasons for pursuing conservation equivalency was to eliminate the mode split because they got negative public feedback on that. I guess I'm a little hesitant to preclude them from pursuing that option if it's more conservative and also is something their public likes because it's more simple and doesn't create, more advantage for one sector. So I wonder if New Jersey can just clarify that that is the case with option 2.
Joe?
Thank you, Mr. Chair. That is correct. I mean, there is that possibility that members of our public and even our council would reject this idea of the mode split to the extent that if their only option was to have both at 3 fish, that we wanted that option there for them.
Thanks. Nicola?
Thank you. I'll look to staff to correct me if I'm wrong, but because that is a proposed measure that is more conservative than what's required, the state does not need board approval to implement that measure?
That's correct.
Okay, yeah, that was a good clarification. Mike Louisi.
Thank you, Mr. Chairman. So I would like to be able to support New Jersey, and I think that it would be nice to be able to go, for them to be able to go back and work with their stakeholders to try to find something that works for them. But as this table stands, I have grave concerns over some of the options in the proposal with the highest bag limits. You know, while those bag limits are probably not very likely to be attained, MRIP, as it when you have high bag limits, there's a probability for there to be, you know, really large estimates of catch if, by chance, somebody comes home with a cooler full of fish and is intercepted by one of the APIS surveyors in the state. So, given that I think we're dancing around the point that there may be some form of a payback, as there is going to be a payback, a pound for pound payback. We talked about this at our joint meeting in December when we were talking about the rec measures. We're also facing a rebuilding plan that's even going to be worse as far as, you know, the reductions that are going to be necessary. So at this point now, unless New Jersey is willing to take some of these options off the table that have the 15 fish bag limit, the 10 fish bag limit, even the 8 fish bag limit for all modes, I would be inclined to support the motion, given the concerns that I think could come as a result of having rules in place that have bag limits that high. Thank you.
Thanks, Mike. Adam Nowalski.
As Joe mentioned, we haven't had a lot of time to get input from the public, but one thing that we've heard, and we heard it in the last discussions, was concerns about mode split. So I think we would like to have the opportunity in New Jersey to have that conversation. I would be inclined to look for inclusion of 2, 3, and 6 so that we could at least get that input from our public, given that we've heard that as a theme, and at least that would provide some sense of compatibility with, we're doing something for somebody, so we're giving somebody a chance to consider things. I would note that all of those options are more conservative than what would become the status quo option, option number 1 under that. I know it's been a long day already, but I'm going to move to substitute to allow conservation equivalency for the states that are accountable for less than 1% of the total coastwide harvest, and to approve New Jersey's proposals 1, 2, 3, and 6.
Go ahead and get that up on, excuse me, get that up on the board. Okay, Adam, is what's up on the board? Is that reflect your substitute motion?
Yes, thank you, Mr. Chairman.
Great. Do we have a second? Craig Pugh.
Second for discussion.
Discussion on the motion. Justin Davis.
Thank you, Mr. Chair. I'm wondering if Adam can clarify his rationale for not including option 4, which does away with the mode split, has a low bag limit, which one of the concerns that's been voiced around the table is a high bag limit, but including option 3, which has that high 8 fish bag limit.
Adam?
2 words, well, 1 word, snappers. A juvenile bluefish caught from piers, land, first fish for a lot of people, and to exclude that opportunity would be a no-go at home.
Mike Luisi.
Thank you, Tony. So I'm looking at option 3 and comparing it with option 6. And what I'm seeing is that if these are supposedly equivalent, I'm challenged in understanding with an 8-fish bag limit, based on the open season dates, there looks like to be a 2-month closure in the fall under an 8-fish bag limit. But under the 5-fish bag limit, there's two waves closed, both the spring and the fall. And so I almost feel like they should be reversed, where the larger bag limit should have more closures associated with them, and the lower bag limit should have less closure. And I just wonder if somebody can explain how those two, the numbers aren't on the board, but I don't remember what they were in the proposal, but how they can be equivalent to one another.
Joe?
Thanks, Mr. Chair. It's just how the numbers work. The wave closures have some high variability, but what we're offering with that bag limit of 8 fish is a closure in wave 5, and there's just a greater reduction in a wave 5 closure than there would be in the proposed wave 2 and 6 closures for the 5-fish bag limit. And wave 5 happens to be our most consistent of the waves, I believe.
Okay, further discussion on the motion? Okay, do we need time to caucus? 1 minute to caucus. I'm sorry for the delay, everyone. They're just wanting to make sure that the numbers that we're going to take action on in New Jersey's proposal are indeed correct. Should have this wrapped up here pretty soon. Thanks. Okay, before we vote, I'd like to call on Adam Nowalski, please.
All right, thank you, everyone. So in reviewing this, I think Mike brought up a great point about the differences between options 3 and 6. We've got some question about the validity of option 6 right now as it was presented. As a result of that, and with the intention of using option 6, we were looking to get some benefit to the closed season and the bag limit. It would be my intention at this point to withdraw the motion with the consent of the board to substitute, and then bring forth a new motion that would include options 1, 2, and a slightly modified 3 that would drop the bag limit from there, so that we'd have an option. So with the consent of the board, Mr. Chairman, I'd like to withdraw the motion and then be recognized to offer a new substitute.
Okay, any objection to what Adam is proposing? Okay.
Okay, so the new motion will be moved to substitute to allow conservation equivalency for states that are accountable for less than 1% of the total coastwide harvest, and to approve New Jersey's options 1, 2, and a modified option 3 with a 6-fish bag limit.
Okay, while staff gets that prepared, can I get a second? Second on the Marty Gary. Substitute motion up on the board. Any discussion on the substitute motion? Nicola Meserve.
Thank you, Mr. Chairman. I guess I'm just looking for some clarity as to whether this meets the reduction required. Was this reviewed by the technical committee? Is the table in both the New Jersey proposal and the TC review of the New Jersey proposal wrong? That just switched up the numbers? Like, how certain are we that this modification is conservationally equivalent, having not had it reviewed by the technical committee?
Joe?
So the option of concern has been completely dropped. Now the only option that we are so option 1 is the coastwide measure. 2 is 3 fish for all modes, and the new option that's out there is the approved seasonal closure of September 1 through October 31st, and it was 8 fish, and we're bringing it down to 6, and that was almost a 29% reduction originally. So we're building up from there as far as the percent savings.
Okay, further discussion on the motion? Mike?
Thank you, Mr. Chairman. So the previous motion I was prepared to oppose. The 8 fish bag limit it was just too much in my opinion. 6 is better, and it's right on that line for kind of going back and forth in my mind about, I think I can support that to give New Jersey an option moving forward with their stakeholders. I don't think that when they get out to the public, and the for-hire sector at least, is going to see an increase. Instead of implementing the coastwide measure, the for-hire fleet, I think, is going to give you guys a little bit of grief over one additional fish in their bag, but then they close for 2 months. And I think that's going to be problematic, moving this forward when your for-hire fleet reaches out to you and provides comment. But I will support the motion to give New Jersey some bit of flexibility. I don't think it's anything that's going to put us in any worse position than we might end up being in a few years anyway under the rebuilding plan. So I'll support the motion. Thanks.
Thanks, Mike. Any more discussion? Okay, how about 1 minute to caucus, and actually 1 minute this time? Okay, is the board ready to vote? Okay, all those in favor of the substitute motion, please raise your hand. Okay, 11 in favor. All those opposed? Okay, 5 opposed. Any abstentions? Null votes? Okay, the motion to substitute passes. It now becomes the main motion. I guess I should probably read that into the record at some point. Now the main motion is move to allow conservation equivalency for states that are accountable for less than 1% of the total coastwide harvest, and to approve New Jersey's options 1, 2, and a modified 3 with the 6 fish bag limit. Is there a need to caucus for this, or is the board ready to vote? Okay, if they're ready, all in favor, please raise your hand. Actually, yeah, sorry. This is final action. It is a roll call vote. So I guess I'll start by asking, is there any opposition to the motion? Okay, no opposition. Any abstentions? Okay, then the motion passes by unanimous consent. Okay, next item on the agenda is to elect a vice chair, because it's really no fun for me to be up here all by myself having all the fun. So look to see if there's a motion for that. Russ Allen?
Thank you, Mr. Chair. It's a great pleasure. I offer up Joe Semino to the board as vice chair.
Any second to that motion? Mike Louisi. Any opposition? I didn't think there would be. I guess congratulations, Joe. Thank you, at least.
Godspeed to you, Mr. Chair.
Yeah, no, I just started. Okay, before we adjourn, I did mention at the beginning of the board meeting that I just wanted to get a sense of when states think they'll be able to implement their 2020 management measures, either through conservation equivalency or, for most cases, the coastwide measures. And just as an FYI to the board, North Carolina implemented the 3-fish, 5-fish bag limit on February 1st. So I guess kind of working south to north without spending too much time and get just a general sense of when states think they'll be able to implement things. So I'll start with Florida. Jim Estes.
Thank you, Mr. Chairman. So our process is we have 7 commissioners that approve our rules, and they meet 5 times a year. They're going to be meeting in about 2 weeks, I think, and the next time they meet is in May. And so the agenda is already set for February. And so we can bring this and plan to bring this to our commission in May. Sometimes when there are technical issues and there are small things that we do, that we can do a one-stop shop where they approve it during the meeting. This is a little bit bigger deal because of the change in the bag limit that we're going to implement. And so we're going to have to go to the May meeting and then the July meeting, which means it will not be implemented until sometime in August. And we catch about a quarter of the fish, so that's going to endanger, I think, the RHL.
Okay, yeah, thanks. That kind of brings in question just how successful we'll be in 2020, despite trying to base reductions on 2018. So appreciate that. Georgia, if I remember correctly, you're able to move pretty quickly after conservation equivalency. But Doug, I'll pass over to you for any information on top of that.
You are correct. I'm trying to get it done by March 1.
Okay, thanks, Doug. South Carolina, Mel?
Thanks, Mr. Chair. Yeah, in the same way we adopted the 15-fish bag limit, as soon as it becomes effective in federal waters, it will become the law of the state of South Carolina.
And thanks. And Dustin, if you remind me, or maybe Derek will know, is there a general sense of when the measures in federal waters will be implemented?
I've been told that they're working on it, and it says soon as possible. Correct me if I'm wrong, but I believe they're putting it through as an emergency action.
Yes, I believe so. I don't have a date I can give you, though.
Okay, thanks. I'm just looking for a general timeline, not set dates. So that's good enough. Virginia.
It's on the agenda for our February 25th meeting, so it should be approved then.
Thanks. PRFC, Marty.
We'll discuss, Chris, on our March 6th meeting and should have it implemented within 10 days of that.
Thanks, Marty. Maryland, Mike.
Via our public notice authority, our rules for 3-fish and 5-fish, the coastwide measure was effective on February 1st. So we're up to speed.
All right. Thanks, Mike. Delaware, Stu Mickles.
Thanks, Chris. We just got some new authority granted to us, so we could probably do it pretty quickly once we get the process to implement that authority in place. But it likely won't be before the feds put in their regs.
All right, thanks, Stu. New Jersey, Jeff?
We'll do this for April 1st with striped bass.
Thanks. New York, Jim Gilmore?
We're doing an emergency rule, so we'll definitely have it done by April 1st, and even before the fish show up, even if Puxatawny Phil is right.
Thanks. Connecticut, Justin Davis.
I think on the outside, we would definitely have it done by April 1st, but very good chance we'd have it done sooner than that. That's well before there's any bluefish being caught in Connecticut, so no danger there.
All right, thanks. Rhode Island, Jay.
Yep, so we are in process now, should have it fully implemented by April 1st.
Okay, thanks. Massachusetts, Nicola?
We have a state commission meeting late in March, and then should have it in place by mid-April to early May.
Thanks. New Hampshire, Sherry?
Yes, we've already enacted the rule.
Thanks. And state of Maine?
Thanks. That's why our motto is Dirigo, I lead. We're already in compliance.
All right, we weren't the first. We're first in flight, but not first in bluefish conservation. So, anyways, I appreciate everyone's indulgence on just where you stand on getting these measures in place. Is there any other business to come before the Bluefish Board? Okay, if there's no objection, then we're adjourned.